Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Planning for Retirement podcast. My name is Kevin Lau. I am your host, and today is going to be the first volume of a rapid-fire Q&A session. Shout out to Roberto for this podcast idea. Really love the idea. I know this is not a new thing. We've seen some other podcasts do this as well, but Roberto was like, we need to do this on the PFR podcast. So here we are, volume 1, rapid-fire Q&A. We pulled 5 questions that we've seen from our clients, from reviews, from online forums, conversations that we've had in the marketplace, and just questions that we thought were really thought-provoking and good questions that are relevant in today's times. And of course, relevant to you all, PFR Nation. PFR Nation, if you are new, if you are new here and you are over 50, you're planning to retire, you're hoping to fire your boss, free up your time to travel more, play more golf, spend time with your loved ones, do what you want to do when you want to do it, make sure to follow the podcast. And also make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're putting out weekly retirement-related content specifically designed for you all. And listen, going forward, like I said, this is volume 1 of this particular podcast edition. So going forward, I want to pull questions from you, the listener, PFR Nation. So email me, kevin@imaginefinancialsecurity.com. Again, that's kevin@imaginefinancialsecurity.com. You can reach me on social media, or you can even comment directly on this episode on Spotify or on YouTube. Love to curate some questions from you all as well. Excited for these questions. I'm going to tee up these real quick. Number 1, we're going to talk about getting a mortgage in retirement and how that actually works. Number 2, we're going to talk a little bit about spousal IRAs and spousal Roth IRAs, particularly if one spouse is retired. Number 3, we're going to hit on advisor fees, financial advisor fees. That's going to be juicy. Number 4, we're going to talk about the decision of what to do with your pension. Okay, do you roll it over? Do you annuitize it? And then number 5, the question is, do you ditch treasuries for FDIC-insured CDs, given the uncertainty and the volatility in the bond markets today? So again, these are real-world questions that I believe that were relevant to you all. Hopefully you all find value in this particular podcast episode. And of course, make sure to follow us, make sure to subscribe to the YouTube, as I mentioned, and make sure to share this podcast with someone else who also fits that PFR Nation type of bill. All right, before we dive in, you know I love golf. If you've been following me for a while, I love golf. I dedicated an entire episode on my top 20 golf courses. And I also broke down my top 5 Masters winners a couple of months ago when the Masters was going on the YouTube channel. So I love golf. Truthfully, right now, just given I have 3 boys that are fairly young, playing golf, not really playing a ton of golf right now, although I will be playing tomorrow, my first round probably since February. So I'm excited to get back out there. But I love the game of golf. And one of the reasons I love the game of golf is because of the life lessons that it teaches you. The lessons on the golf course are directly related to lessons that you should learn and internalize in everyday life. And one of the things for me that I struggle with is patience. Okay. I want to get results. I have a high urgency. Okay. So patience for me is a challenge. My wife reminds me this all the time. Okay. And I admit this. I am not blind to this fact. Okay. At least now. Back in the day, probably was a little bit blind to this fact. But I do believe patience is one of the things that golf has taught me over the years. And I think back to this match play, this epic match play event that I had. This was probably back in 2011 when I was actually playing a lot of golf. And it's a bracket style. So it's like a March Madness style match play. This was in Goose Creek in Leesburg, Virginia, one of my favorite clubs that I used to play at. And essentially they pair you up and you do a one-on-one match. And if you win, you go on to the next round. If you lose, you're out. This was the semifinal match. Okay. So I made it pretty far this year. I was playing pretty good golf, but semifinal match. And the gentleman I was paired up with just came out and absolutely drug me through the mud, the front 9. Okay. I was hitting him poorly and he was playing well. Okay. So it was a terrible combination. I can't remember the exact number I was down on the front 9, but I believe I was down 6 on the front 9. I don't think it was 7. I think it was 6. I was 6 down, 6 holes down on the front 9. So through 9 holes, I lost 6 of them. Yeah, I didn't win a single hole. Pushed 3 of them. And going into the back 9, I've been playing a lot of golf at that point in time. And I knew at any point in time I could catch fire. And I was trying to stay patient in the moment, even though that was hard to do. Okay. Like I said, I was getting absolutely embarrassed on this course. But I came out on the back 9. We tied 10. Okay, so number 10, we tied. Number 11, when was the par 3? I believe the par 3 started on number 12. So I think we pushed the first 2 holes. Okay. And then on number 12, it was a par three, and that's where things heated up for me. I went birdie on number 12, eagle on number 13, birdie on number 14, birdie on number 15. And that number 15 was a hole out from the bunker, by the way. Okay. So on a 4-hole stretch, I went birdie, eagle, birdie, birdie, the best 4-hole stretch that I've ever had in my life. And I made one more birdie on 18 to close out the match. And I ended up winning the match by 1. And I shot a 33 on the back nine, 3 under, by still to this day, my best 9-hole ever, my 9-hole stretch ever. So I think back to that round, and I think back to this idea of golf teaching you life lessons of patience. And I think about what's going on in the markets today. We've had a lot of uncertainty, okay, with tariffs, with Liberation Day on April 2nd, with China, the trade talks with China, a lot of geopolitical tensions and concerns, with Russia and Ukraine. And so there's been so many reasons for investors to flock to the sidelines, to bail out, sell out, and move to cash. Well, guess what? The S&P 500 is positive year to date. The NASDAQ is positive year to date. International markets are up nearly double digits so far year to date. Emerging markets are positive. Bonds are basically flat. And if I were to tell you a few months ago that all of this would be essentially in the rearview mirror, I know we're not out of the woods yet. There's still a lot of uncertainty with the markets and tariffs and trade deals. But overall, if you stayed the course and if you stayed patient, you were rewarded. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, being disciplined, having a process, staying unemotional when emotions are running high, that helps pay off in the long run. And again, this is why I love the game of golf, because of all of the life lessons it can teach you. And in this case, what it can teach you about investing. Stay patient, keep your blinders on. There's going to be continued noise and uncertainty related to tariffs and inflation and all of these things, interest rates and how many cuts the Fed's, all of this is noise. If you've got a long-term plan and that long-term plan is directly aligned with your specific objectives, your specific risk tolerance, your risk capacity, okay, your income goals in retirement, your legacy goals, it's all going to be good. Okay. So stay patient, stay disciplined, and try to cut through the noise. Easier said than done, I know. Okay. Especially for folks that are retired. You're living on your portfolio. Okay. You're not accumulating and you're not saving more money. Easier said than done. But this is why it's so important to have a trusted partner, to have a trusted advisor in your corner to remind you why you're investing, what you're investing for, and having a process and plan to make sure you can weather the storm, because this is not going to be the last bear market you go through. Okay. Again, bear markets happen every 5 years on average. So if you have a 30-year time horizon in retirement, you're going to have 6 bear markets you live through in your lifetime. And just because you're retired doesn't mean you should stop investing in equities. Okay. So because you have inflation, you have longevity risk, all of these other factors that will hurt your portfolio if you get too conservative too early on in retirement. All right. With that aside, why don't we jump into the questions today? Why don't we start with question number 1? Can I get a mortgage if I just retired and don't have income, but I have the assets? Look at my balance sheet. This is a great question, and a question I see often for retirees. It's more common. It was probably more common 3 to 4 years ago than it has been over the last couple of years, because interest rates have gone up. But when interest rates were 2.5%, 3% on a 30-year mortgage, it was like, why not get free money from my bank and invest the difference, because I can earn 4 or 5% even in a conservative portfolio and keep my money liquid. Today, not as relevant. I see more people more inclined to pay off their mortgage and not have that mortgage into retirement. But you may need or want a mortgage for whatever reason in retirement. Maybe you're buying your dream home and you need to borrow a couple $100,000 or $300,000 in order to kind of finish out a certain project in order to maintain liquidity. So the answer is yes, you can get a mortgage. If you're retired, you have no more earned income anymore. Okay. So it's very similar to a self-employed individual. And I talked about on the podcast last week how I ran into challenges myself when my wife and we were planning to build a house, and we basically put in our deposit and the build was started, and then all of a sudden, we pivoted and said, you know what, I'm going to quit my W-2 and start my own firm. Banks didn't like that. Okay. So if I were to try to qualify for that mortgage on my own without my dad co-signing, they would have easily denied me and we would have just lost our deposit, which would have sucked, but it is what it is. And thankfully, very blessed, my parents were supportive of me and my dad had confidence that I was going to pay the mortgage payments, which I did. And now that house is fully, we've sold that house now. But I ran into the same challenges as a self-employed individual. They want to see income. They want to see history of income. Same thing applies when you are retired. They're not looking at that. You don't have a W-2 to show. You don't have a pay stub to show regular income. So what they're going to ask for is they're going to ask for regular income coming out of your investment portfolio, generally speaking. Okay. I'm talking about traditional lenders with a traditional conventional mortgage. Okay. And I'm no mortgage expert. So I guess the first word of advice is consult with a mortgage expert who specializes in working with retirees. Okay. But generally speaking, the process you should expect is, yes, you can get a loan if you have the assets, but you need to show income coming from those assets on a consistent basis, on a recurring basis. Every lender is going to have different standards. So they're going to tell you what they're going to require. It might be 3 months or 6 months of recurring payments coming from your investment portfolio. And they're going to use that as income counted, especially if you're not taking Social Security yet, or you don't have a pension yet. And maybe you're sitting on a $2 or $3 million portfolio. You're like, why can't I get this $500,000 mortgage? I could pay it off in cash if I wanted to. Doesn't matter. The conventional mortgages, they're going to want to see that regular income coming out of the portfolio. Okay. So the good news is, if you don't need all of that income that you're taking in order to qualify for the mortgage, you can stop it later on. Like, there's no requirement to say this income needs to continue for the rest of your life. So you can pull out maybe $9,000 or $10,000 a month, get the mortgage. Once you get the mortgage, then you can readjust that cash flow stream to more align with what your actual expenses are. So that's kind of the traditional conventional way. There are lenders out there that will work with you in what's called a balance sheet loan. Okay. So these are typically a little bit more expensive. Okay. But if you want to go that route, you're like, I don't want to pull my portfolio up because then it's going to trigger a bunch of taxes, and I want to do some Roth conversions, or, I want to keep my Social Security tax really, really low. You may have reasons for this, or maybe you want those ACA credits, and you're like, I don't want to pull from my IRA because that's going to trigger that's going to hurt me for my ACA premiums, my Affordable Care Act premium tax credits. I don't want to do that. Okay. So there are lenders out there, and you need to find a reputable lender, a valuable lender that does what they do. It's called a bank statement loan or a balance sheet loan, where they essentially look at your assets, they look at your liabilities, and they will determine if you are capable of paying that mortgage back. And if you're sitting on a $2-3 million portfolio and you're trying to borrow $300,000 or $400,000, you should be good to go. And as long as you have a good credit score, you should be good to go on that loan. But again, I'm telling you, they are typically a little bit more expensive. Maybe add another 25 basis points, maybe up to 50 basis points on top of what a regular conventional loan would look like. So, but the good news is, yes, you can get the mortgage. Just work with a reputable lender, work with a professional that has experience working with retirees, because they understand what's going on. That's the biggest thing, is if you're working with a lender that has no idea what's going on and they've never worked with a retiree, that's going to be a frustrating process, because they're going to have to keep coming back to you. Hey, can you do this? Can you do that? Work with someone up front that knows the deal, works with the retirees, and that can be part of your vetting questions as you interview that lender. But again, interest rates, now that they're north of 7.3, 7.4%, I mean, it's definitely more attractive to have a no or low mortgage type of situation in retirement. If it were me, and if I was looking to transition to retirement, maybe you're selling your home in New York or California, you're looking to move to a lower cost of living area, and you're like, hey, it'd be really nice to keep this money liquid on my balance sheet and maybe take out a mortgage. Well, think about the required rate of return you would need on that side fund in order to outpace what you would earn by just paying off that mortgage in full or not having a mortgage. Like I said, 3-4 years ago, 3%, 2.5%, I would have said absolutely, because a conservative portfolio, we could even outpace that particular interest rate. Whereas these days, you're going to need to take on a little bit more risk to exceed that 7% mortgage. And that's not a guarantee. There's no guarantee that the S&P 500 or international markets or the bond markets are going to yield that type of rate of return over the course of 10, 15, 20 years. Okay. So you got to weigh the pros and cons. You got to look at the current interest rate environment. You've got to look at your balance sheet. You got to look at your tax situation before making these decisions. And obviously that will impact what kind of home you buy in retirement, or what kind of home you move to in retirement. All right. Number 2. There's a good one. So can a spousal Roth or traditional IRA be done for my spouse if they are retired? Okay. So in terms of contributing to an IRA or Roth, really the first requirement is you have earned income. Okay. So if someone is retired, like the textbook definition is, no, you cannot contribute to an IRA or Roth. Even if you're collecting Social Security or pension income, that is not considered earned income. Earned income is from employment or self-employment. However, if you are married and you are filing jointly, you can qualify for a spousal IRA or a spousal Roth IRA. Okay. So if spouse A, let's say, is retired, but spouse B is still working and they have enough income to justify an IRA or Roth IRA contribution, you're good to go. You can continue to do the spousal IRA or Roth IRA, even though spouse A is retired. Now, the question comes, how much can you contribute? Is it deductible? Can you do a Roth IRA? That's going to be dependent on many, many factors. And the max contribution you can make if you are over 50 is, first of all, the max contribution for an IRA or Roth IRA is $7,000. And if you're over 50, there's an additional $1,000 catch up. So most of you listening are over 50. So that would be an $8,000 max contribution for the year 2025. If you are over a certain income, modified adjusted gross income, you may not be eligible to do a spousal Roth IRA. Again, if you're married filing jointly, the Roth IRA phase out starts at $236,000 and finishes. So it begins to phase you out as a modified adjusted gross income combined $236,000, and then you're completely phased out once you hit $246,000. So it's essentially a gradual decrease in the amount you're eligible to contribute. So if you make $236,001, you probably can't contribute $8,000, but it's probably very close to maybe $7,900 or $7,800 if you're over 50. Okay. If you make $247,000, which is $1,000 over the modified adjusted gross income amount, then you can no longer contribute directly to a Roth IRA. Now, there are ways you can get money into the Roth IRA, even if you're above that income. Okay. The mechanism in which you do that is what's called the backdoor Roth IRA contribution, whatever contribution amount to a regular IRA or a traditional IRA. That contribution would not be deductible. And then you would turn around and convert that IRA contribution into the Roth, because there are no modified adjusted gross income phase outs for a Roth conversion. That would be technically a Roth conversion because you got money into an IRA and then you immediately turn around and convert that to a Roth IRA. So in 2012, when this rule came about, Roth IRA conversions, no modified adjusted gross income phase out, this is where this opportunity came out, this backdoor Roth IRA contribution. Okay. Now, what I caution you is there is a pro rata rule. So if you have a traditional IRA as well in that individual's name, so let's say spouse B is the one making that, or I'm sorry, spouse A is the one making that contribution, and they also have a traditional IRA, it's going to be assumed that all of that IRA is included in this conversion amount, and you're going to be limited in terms of how much is actually contributed tax-free. And in fact, you're going to be paying taxes on some of that amount contributed. So it is one of those things you need to look at what makes sense to do that backdoor Roth IRA conversion, whether or not that individual has a traditional IRA in their name. What about the traditional IRA? The traditional IRA for a spouse. Okay. So we talked about the Roth IRA. We talked about an IRA, you being eligible to contribute to a spousal traditional IRA or Roth, assuming at least one spouse has enough income to show for that contribution max. What if you are trying to deduct that contribution, that IRA contribution? So there are also income limits on how much you can make before you are phased out of a deduction of a traditional IRA. So the benefits of doing a traditional IRA and getting a deduction for that is that money grows tax deferred. You reduce your taxable income in today in the year of that contribution, and all of that money is deferred. So the mindset there is, I'm in a higher tax bracket now than I'm going to be in the future. Therefore, I want to take a deduction today and I'll pay taxes later when my taxable income goes down. Now, obviously, this does involve a little bit of risk. There could be legislative changes where tax rates go up. Maybe you're actually not in a lower tax rate like you thought you were going to be. This is oftentimes the case, is people that are surprised once they get to retirement, their taxable income is kind of the same because they have a lifestyle need that they need to support. They're going to be taking income, especially if it's in tax deferred accounts, and that is going to be included in taxable income. Okay. But again, there is a deduction phase out. So if you are married filing jointly and you are not an active participant in an IRA, which is this case, but your spouse is, it also begins to phase you out at that 236 level and completely phases you out at $246,000. So just be careful whether or not you can deduct that IRA contribution, and that will drive whether or not you want to do a traditional IRA contribution versus a Roth. The Roth, the mindset there is, I'm in a lower tax bracket now, or I think tax rates are going to go up in the future. Therefore, I'd rather pay taxes now on my contribution and let that money go tax free. My thought overall on this strategy is if you're retired, spouse A is retired and spouse B is still working, how much is that going to move the needle for you related to your retirement income goals? Okay. Saving an extra $7,000 or $8,000 into an IRA, let's say it's going to be done for the next 1, 2, or 3 years. Crunch the numbers, see how much that actually moves the needle relative to your long-term plan and your ability to spend in retirement. And then compare that to potentially what you could use that money for today. Paying down your mortgage. Maybe it's experiences. Maybe you take an extra trip this year while spouse B is still working, because why not? You're retired. Maybe you start to enjoy some of the fruits of your labor and getting to that point of actually being retired. So my thought there is many people that are in savings mode, and let's say one spouse retires, oftentimes they're kind of in that same mindset of let's continue to save, not realizing that's additional savings, especially with an IRA. We're talking about an $8,000 savings rate, not going to move the needle a ton unless you're going to be doing this for the next 10 or 15 years, which in most cases, that's not going to be the situation. Okay. So just kind of be careful with this concept of actually over saving for retirement and comparing that to what you could actually use that money for in today's dollars, in today, life experiences today. Okay. So anyway, so that's that one. All right. Number 3, this is a really great topic. Okay. So this is the question of what to do with your pension. Okay. So sometimes, not all the times, but sometimes you might have the ability to take your pension, which is an account balance essentially. And this account balance could either be turned into a traditional pension in a sense, essentially like another social security payment. It's what it is. It's a life annuity. That's what you're doing with the pension. If you choose to annuitize it, is you're turning it into an annuity. Or you could potentially roll that into your own IRA. Of course, you could also, in these scenarios, you could also cash it out, but then you're going to be paying taxes on this. Okay. If it's a very small amount, $2,000 or $3,000, and you're deciding, sure, maybe it makes sense just for simplicity purposes, just cash it out and use that for current income or roll it into your IRA. But if it's a meaningful amount, and in this situation we were looking at was $500,000, that's a meaningful amount in terms of, okay, do you annuitize this or turn it into a traditional pension, or do you roll it into an IRA? And in the scenario that the lady mentioned, this was actually from a Facebook post, the income paid from that particular pension, if she decided to annuitize, was about $41,700 per year. Okay, so if you do the math, like really simple back of the napkin calculations, if you take that 41,700 and you divide that into 500,000, that brings you to what's called your payout rate. And so in that scenario, the payout rate was 8.34%. If you look at annuities today, like the first thing I'd like to do is like, okay, let's kind of stress test and look at annuities today. Annuity payouts, which I've done recently, you're not getting anywhere close to 8.34%, especially an individual that's 62. I think that lady was 62. And so this is an argument for some of these pensions have extremely high attractive payout rates that, number one, you cannot get in a private annuity. So if you were to roll that into your own IRA and then purchase an annuity, the payout rate is not going to be 8.34%. So there's value there. I think the other value is, let's kind of really think through this logically. If you had a $500,000 balance and you were taking distributions on your own, so if you decided to roll that into an IRA and invest it in some sort of investment allocation, maybe it's a 60-40 target or 70-30, 80-20, whatever it might be. The question you need to ask yourself is, how much income are you comfortable with taking on a regular basis from that portfolio? And the answer is, you're lying if you're saying it's higher than 8.34%. It's most likely going to be closer to 4 or 5%. Why is this the case? I blame it on the 4% rule. This has been kind of dubbed like the tried and true benchmark for retirees in terms of rate of withdrawal. But there are so many downsides that we've talked about before. I think the research is revolutionary. It's totally changed the way folks look at retirement income planning. But I've also realized, now that I've been practicing for this many years, is that it has led to many, many retirees underspending their portfolio, particularly in their go-go years, when they're healthy, when they should be traveling, when they should be enjoying time with their family, going to see their loved ones, doing life experiences that might cost a little bit of money. So what they do is they underspend early on, and then later on they realize, oh my goodness, now I have this surplus of income or cash flow, but now they're in their mid 70s or late 70s and they just don't have the energy or the capacity to do what they probably should have been doing in their early 60s, mid 60s, etc. So one of the values that I see in these kinds of pensions or annuities in general, and by the way, I don't even sell annuities. I'm just telling you, this is one of the values that I see for my clients that have annuity income. It kind of forces them to spend the money that they otherwise would not have spent. Like I said, 4%, 5% is a typical rate of withdrawal for most people that are doing it themselves, which is substantially lower than 8.34%. If you use the 4% rule in a $500,000 portfolio, you're looking at roughly, what is that, $25,000 on an annual basis relative to $41,700 on an annual basis from the pension. And it was really interesting because all of the comments on that Facebook page, everybody was saying, roll it over into your own IRA, roll it over, roll it over. The reason was because all of these folks that are commenting, a lot of them are DIY investors or kind of DIY retirees. And again, they're looking at the 4% rule. They're looking at what they can earn outside. But most importantly, they are very biased against annuities. Okay. I've just seen this across the board. I did a dedicated, a specific episode that the perception on annuities is very negative. Okay. And rightfully so. Annuities are oftentimes positioned inappropriately. They're oftentimes sold, not bought. And so there is a negative perception, from the general public, from general consumers with annuities. Myself, having been practicing for now close to almost 17 years now, the perception of annuities should be like that because I worked in two companies that sold annuities. So I used to sell annuity products and I've seen some of the misrepresentation of some of these products. Let's kind of put it that way from the inside. Now being a fee only planner, a registered investment advisor, I also now see the value of having annuities even more. Okay. Because again, I see individuals going back to the 4% rule, underspending oftentimes in their go-go years. Now, I'm not saying annuitize your whole portfolio. I'm not saying if that was their only asset, that $500,000 pension, should they annuitize the whole thing? No, I'm not saying that. But maybe there is room for some annuity income in the portfolio in retirement to create an additional guaranteed floor over and above your Social Security, which most of you will have Social Security as an annuity. That is an annuity. Okay. So if you've got Social Security as kind of like the first leg of the stool, but you don't have a traditional pension, maybe you purchase an annuity, or if you have a pension like this lady here that gives you a very, very attractive payout rate, consider that. Look at the payout rates. Call that insurance company or call the administrator of that pension and ask them to run illustrations for you and say, hey, if I annuitize or if I turn this into a pension at these ages, what would my payout rate be? And compare that to the private annuities. And that'll give you a little bit of a gauge in terms of whether or not that's a good deal. Number one. Number two is, how much do you annuitize? Does it make sense to annuitize a portion of that or turn a portion into a pension? Oftentimes these pensions, it's not an all or nothing deal. So this lady who has $500,000 in this particular pension, she could choose to annuitize something. Maybe she does $250,000 instead of the full $500,000. That way she creates a nice little income floor over and above her Social Security that she can kind of say, hey, I'm going to rely on this for the rest of my life to provide for my basic necessities, my food, shelter, just clothing, just, utilities, my necessities. And then I can take that other $250,000, roll it into my own IRA and be a little more flexible with that. That's generally what I see as the best practice. Annuitizing your whole portfolio, turning your whole portfolio into a pension, not good because that's not liquid on your balance sheet anymore. So if there was an emergency that popped up, you can't access that $500,000 anymore if you annuitize the whole thing. Okay. And so this is the risk. You have liquidity risk there, but the benefit is you have a higher guaranteed income floor, much higher payout rate over and above what you can get inside of a regular systematic rate of withdrawal, generally speaking. And then you have, most importantly, that longevity protection. If you lived longer than you anticipate, maybe you spend down some of your other assets. Well, this payment, in addition to Social Security, hopefully will continue to pay out for the rest of your lifetime. Okay, this is a good one. Number 4 is advisor fees. All right. So this question was also on a Facebook page, Facebook group. And basically the question was, I'm talking to a money manager at one of the large firms. And anytime I see that, I'm like, I kind of cringe because I'm like, money manager. I'm like, what does that even mean? I'm like, is that a financial planner? Is that an investment advisor? Is that an insurance salesman? Is that a broker? I don't even know what that means. But I'm talking to a money manager at one of the large firms. I presume they mean something like one of the Wall Street firms or wirehouses or traditional big banks. And he mentioned his fee is 1.75%. Does that seem reasonable? So, in short, no. That's an extremely high fee, especially in today's market. Okay. Maybe if you were looking at this 10, 15, 20 years ago, okay, I'd probably say that's probably in line. I think the industry average, when I first started in 2008, the industry average for a management fee was just over 1.6%. But that did not include any other hidden costs. Okay. And that's a thing to be thoughtful about, is like your fees are not just what you pay that advisor, but also what you're paying internally with some of these expenses within the fund itself. Maybe they're using mutual funds. Maybe they're using ETFs or high turnover funds. And that's going to impact those internal costs within that particular portfolio, in addition to that advisor fee. But 1.75% is a very high fee. Now, what I'd say is the higher portfolio balance, the lower the fee typically is as a percentage of the portfolio. Okay. Typically, you'll see blended fee schedules. For the first $1 million, it might be 1%. Then the next million, it might go down to 50 basis points or 0.5%. And then the next 2 million, it might be down from there. So you'd have like this blended fee schedule. But if you're listening to this, PFR Nation, you're probably, your portfolio is probably a minimum of $1 million, upwards of $2.5, $3, $4 million. The fees that you're going to be paying, most likely, if you're talking to a reputable advisor who understands the modern fee schedules, is likely going to be 1% or even less. Okay. Now, the questions I would ask this individual, and I didn't have a chance to comment or talk to this individual, but the questions I would ask is, what is that advisor doing? Like, what is this money manager doing? Like, are they just managing a portfolio? If so, you're definitely overpaying. Okay. Because, again, getting inexpensive money management is pretty simple to do today with modern technology, with robo advisors, with model portfolios. Very simple for you to get a lower fee than 1.75%. Or are they also doing financial planning? Are they doing comprehensive financial planning? Are they also providing tax planning advice and estate planning and retirement modeling? Okay. So those questions also will qualify my answer. So like kind of the short answer is it's probably a little bit high. But then qualifying that with what else are they providing outside of investment management? With our firm, we look at the 5 pillars of retirement planning. We've got income and cash flow as a core pillar. We've got the investments as a core pillar. We've got tax planning or tax optimization as a core pillar. We've got insurance and risk management as a core pillar. Number 5, we have legacy and estate planning. So we're talking about these 5 areas of retirement planning with every single one of our clients. So we're going much deeper than just, hey, what portfolio should we be investing in? What's the risk tolerance and what are your investment goals? We're going much deeper. And so as a result of that, we are providing more value. We can provide more value. And advisors that have the same model as us can also provide more value. So 1.75% could actually be a viable fee if an advisor is doing all of those things. Now, another question to really ask is, does it make sense to pay a percentage or a flat fee? Okay. And this is one of those things. There is no perfect fee schedule. So I've operated on both. I have clients that I serve as the AUM model, and I have clients now that we bring on, they're all in the flat fee model. We just charge a flat flat It's debited quarterly from the investment portfolio, but it's a flat fee and adjusts for inflation over time. But I think the value there is on the flat fee is that it eliminates the conflict of interest of, hey, should I take a lump sum out to pay down my mortgage? Okay. Or should I take a lump sum out to buy an annuity or annuitize part of my portfolio? Or should I more aggressively spend down my portfolio to enjoy fulfillment in retirement? The percentage of AUM model, not saying every advisor that operates on that model is doing this, but ultimately it does disincentivize money flowing out of the money under management, the assets under management. Okay. So if you're having a conversation about, hey, should you keep the money invested with your advisor that's charging a 1.75 or rolling it out and paying down your mortgage, is that an objective conversation? Okay. Or is there an incentive for that advisor to keep your assets there and convince you that they can earn a higher rate of return over above what your mortgage is? That's why I like the flat fee model. And it also encourages me to just be a little more transparent around what is in the best interest of my client and eliminating a thought from any of our clients to think, hey, is Kevin or Roberto or whomever they're talking to, are they doing this because it's in my best interest or in the best interest of their firm? We have a flat fee schedule, and that is what it is. And so a lot of our clients, again, are in that $2 million range or higher. And so therefore, the percent that they're paying is actually oftentimes less than 1%. So we're very fortunate in that regard, is that we can still be very profitable and actually charge 1% or even less than 1% to our clients, and not only provide that investment advice that we're talking about here, but do the other comprehensive planning action items. I feel like we can dedicate an entire episode to advisor fees. And you know what? I might do that in the future. I might add that to the brainstorming list because there's so much more there that I'd love to hit on. But in general, I would ask the advisor what else they're doing outside the investment management. And then you're going to learn a lot more about whether or not that is a good deal or not. All right, number 5, should I bail on the US Treasury market and just buy CDs because they're FDIC insured? Well, this actually came from one of our clients, and I hate to dismiss this question because it is a legitimate question. I do have concerns long term about whether or not the US Treasuries are going to be the safe haven that they once were 20, 30 years ago, even 10 years ago. Okay. But 2012, the rating agencies began to take the US government, US debt from AAA down to AA. Okay. Now all 3 of the rating agencies as of April, May are now AA. So still a very high rating, but not the highest. So it's the second highest across the board. So I do have a long-term concern about this. And obviously we're going through a scenario right now. We're seeing this play out with our federal deficit, with our debts continuing to climb. Our debt is exceeding now $36 trillion. We run an annual deficit now pushing $2 trillion on an annual basis. And now we have this tax bill that is in the Senate it's a gamble. Okay. I mean, because obviously we're talking about tax cuts indefinitely. Okay. So obviously, there's tax cuts indefinitely, and there's additional policies in there that are going to further cut taxes, which I'm all for. Listen, I'm pro low taxes, but it has to translate into growth. It has to translate into jobs coming back. It has to translate into stimulating the economy and putting more money into the pockets of individuals, consumers in the US, and those consumers buying things, consuming things. That is the bedrock of our economy. So it has to result in that. And there is no guarantee that that is going to play out. I looked at the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. It's hard to say if it actually stimulated growth, because we had this period where 2018, it did stimulate growth. Okay. Things were looking pretty good. But then we had COVID. We had the pandemic of 2020, and we had to print more money in order to bail businesses and individuals out. Now, arguably, we probably printed too much money. Now, hindsight's 2020. We didn't know how long the pandemic was going to go on, how long the global shutdowns were going to go on. But ultimately, it did stifle growth a little bit. And now that's coming to bite us again, because again, interest rates are now going up and our payments on that debt is going up as well. So I don't want to dismiss this question, but I think really the answer that I had for this individual was certainly you can invest in CDs, you can invest in treasuries, okay? And both of those are considered very, very safe, almost risk-free in a sense. But I think that the essence that just because CDs are FDIC insured and treasuries are not, the treasuries are backed by the full faith of the US government. So in essence, what you're saying is, you don't believe that the US government is going to back treasuries. If that is the case, FDIC insurance doesn't matter either. Okay. And I think really that's kind of where I'm coming from is you're essentially saying, well, the banks are going to essentially follow through if they were to go bankrupt. And if the treasury market failed, if let's say this happened, we'd all be screwed anyways. Honestly, the whole world, everyone would be screwed because everyone invests in treasuries, not just US investors or US institutions, also international investors. Again, treasuries are the safe haven across the globe. Now, if that changes over the next decade or two, we can reevaluate this conversation. And it might be more so a conversation around totally eliminating fixed income from the US and investing in fixed income in other places across the globe, wherever that might be, wherever the next safe haven is. But if you're saying that treasuries are going to fail, banks are screwed too, because banks invest a majority of their balance sheet in safe investments, which mostly include US Treasuries. Okay. So I didn't dismiss the client. In fact, I actually listened to the client and I took out a core portion of their fixed income and we bought a CD ladder. okay, just to give them that peace of mind. But in my opinion, they're one and the same. They're very a risk-free investment at this point in time, treasuries versus CDs. And it was interesting to see yields are not that much greater with US Treasuries relative to CDs. It was just a slight win on some of the short-term CDs, but some of the longer-term CDs were a slightly higher yield on some of those 3 or 4 year CDs relative to Treasuries. But one of the things to also consider is taxes. Treasuries are, yes, they are taxable at the federal level, but they're tax exempt on the state level. So that is a consideration. If you're in a high tax state, your CD income is going to be taxable at the federal and state level, whereas Treasuries will be tax exempt at the state level. So it's kind of like the municipal bond argument. It depends on your tax rate and ultimately what your goals are, with that particular portfolio. In this case, with this particular client, the goal is taking care of his required minimum distributions over the next 3 to 4 years so he can sleep well at night, because he's very concerned he's heard a lot about the bond markets and the uncertainties there. So the CD ladder is going to basically provide him with his required minimum distributions over the next 4 years. But again, if Treasuries fail, so are CDs, so are banks. And so I think it's kind of one of those things where I wouldn't recommend bailing out of US Treasuries and going into CDs. If your true belief is Treasuries are going to fail, I'd go international, invest in foreign bonds, which we do for a portion of our clients, but it's not going to exceed 3 to 5% of the portfolio. Even for clients that are very, very conservative, maybe it's 3 to 4%. Clients maybe a little more risk tolerance, maybe with a slightly higher percentage in international bonds. And those are doing quite well this year because of this Treasury story, because of the debt story with the US, because of our deficits that we're running. But I hope and pray for the future of the US. I still believe that we are the best country in the world. And everyone wants to come here for a reason. Everyone wants the opportunities in the US for a reason. Everyone wants our markets for a reason. I believe that is not going to change for many, many years to come. But we need to fix this debt issue. We need to fix the deficit issue. I'm willing to wait and see what happens with this bill and with the tax cuts being made permanent and ultimately other tax policies coming into play. We don't know what that bill is going to look like because the Senate's going to make their adjustments and make their recommendations, and it's going to go through a whole process. But the goal is to get that thing passed by July 4th. And I'm curious to see what the Tax Foundation's final take is on that particular bill, because right now it's not a positive take. Okay, the Tax Foundation, whom I believe is very nonpartisan, they are not very keen on the points in the bill. They're kind of like Elon Musk. They believe it's more printing money, more spending, and fewer revenue dollars to pay off our debts. So, but I'm willing to wait and see what happens in the Senate. And again, for me as an American, I hope and pray for the future of our country, for my children, my future grandchildren, and of course, all of us in PFR Nation that are looking to make work optional, looking to retire comfortably. We need fixed income in the portfolio. And right now, the best place to get that is within US bonds. All right, well, that's a wrap on today's episode. Hopefully you guys liked this format. I enjoyed it, truthfully. It was very non-scripted, very off the cuff. Hopefully you guys found value. And again, like I said, if you have a burning question, big or small, I don't care, email me, kevin@imaginefinancialsecurity.com, or drop a comment directly in the Spotify episode, drop a comment into the YouTube video, wherever you're consuming this podcast. I'd love to field your questions and create a little list of questions we're going to hit on, because we'll probably do these every 4 to 5 episodes, just like the whiteboard retirement plans that we break down. We're going to be doing this as a regular episode because I feel like this format's great, because some questions that we get may not warrant a full episode, but definitely warrants attention and worth addressing, especially the ones that are more timely in nature, a little bit more relevant to what's going on into today's economy. And if you found this episode value, if you're finding our content valuable, please leave a 5-star review. It really helps push the algorithm, as you know, allows us to reach more people, help more people plan for retirement. That is what our goal is here at PFR Podcast. And also make sure to leave that review. It really helps too. So leave the 5-star review, but also write something nice and send this to a friend. Send this to a friend that is a PFR Nation caliber type of individual, because I do believe if you're finding value and you share it with someone else that's in a similar boat, they're also going to find value as well. Well, that's it, everybody, today. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. And until next week, I will see you then.